All right, welcome back to the DTVC Extra podcast. So we're going to kind of jump right in. There's no need for an opening segment, right? Now that we're doing a regular podcast episode every week, that one covers all the updates we have on the site, podcasts, and all that other stuff. So we don't need to do that opening segment here. But I did kind of want to get into a little bit about sort of what brought me here to this look at this franchise here, because we're going to be looking at the Predator films. And initially, right, we talked about when I finished up the Marvel Cinematic Universe Phase 2 that I was going to look at some Pam Grier movies. And what ended up happening there is I thought about it some more. I was like, that feels like it would be better for a podcast episode. And then John Cross from After Movie Diner, he reached out about me being on his show, and we were talking about different ideas. And I was like, I've been looking at doing some 70s Pam Grier, and it ended up working much better doing it on his podcast. And I thought, okay, I almost felt like I'd be wasting those movies if I did them for DTVC Extra. That it'd be better to have a guest or be a guest on somebody else's podcast talking about them. So then it's like, okay, well, what do we do next, right? What is the next franchise if I'm not going to do Pam Grier films? And I was looking at different franchises that are available, because I just thought, like, with Marvel, I think there's a little fatigue with the fact that I did 2 back-to-back series looks at Marvel. I mean, I essentially did 12 Marvel movies in a row. And while there was a part of me that wanted to trudge on and keep finishing, at least finish off Phase 3 and the Infinity Saga, there was another part of me that was like, for this, at least for talking about this, or doing a solo podcast episode, there's got to be something else that would probably be better for that. So I thought of a few different franchises. I thought of Terminator. And with Terminator, some of them are available on the streaming services I subscribe to. Some of them are rent only. And I want to kind of keep the costs low as well. I don't want to be renting out too many movies. And of course, if you know me, I don't have as extensive a physical media collection as other people. So I wouldn't be able to just pull those movies from any kind of physical media collection. So that was one idea. Another was Rambo. Now, Rambo's a similar situation. I think even fewer of it's like maybe like half of what is there, like 5 movies, I guess, for Rambo. So maybe not, I think 2 of them are rent only. So same thing. It was kind of like, okay, I'd rather do something that was all streaming. And that's when Predator came to mind. And, realizing, of course, that Predator being owned by 20th Century Fox, which is now owned by Disney, those would all be on Hulu. And they were, for the most part, I think all of them, but one of them's on Hulu. And the one that isn't on Hulu is on like I can stream it through my cable service for free. So I've got them all available. So I thought that would be one good reason to do that. The other thing, of course, is that, I think Predator, when we get into talking about this first Predator movie, is probably up there as one of the greatest action films of all time. And I haven't really had a chance. I mean, recently, of course, a couple weeks ago, we did the podcast episode with Rich Haas from DTV Digest, where we talked about 2, really fantastic PM entertainment flicks, right? We talked about Recoil and we talked about Rage. And I was thinking about it, like, what would be a great action film to be able to talk about here? And that's from Predator. It was like, okay, Predator's just so good. I haven't talked about Schwarzenegger really much on the site. I think I did a little bit with the Expendables, but so we haven't gotten into him as much as we could either. So it just seemed like it would all kind of fit. So that's the idea. So with this episode, we're going to do Predator 1 and Predator 2. The next episode, I'm actually going to go into the Alien vs. Predator films, because I'm going to do them in chronological release order. That was the decision that I made in terms of how to group them. So we'll do Predator, so 1 and 2 this episode, Alien vs. Predator films the next one, and then I don't know if I'm going to bunch up all 3 of the remaining Predator films into one episode, or I may give Prey its own episode, just because I really like that one as well. And, there was a time, boy, when was it? It was a little while ago. I was doing a solo episode. This was before I had the DTVC Extra, in place, where I was discussed Prey, and I recorded the episode, and I didn't really like the way it turned out, so I scrapped it, and I've kind of left it alone since then. I mean, Prey is one that I could actually, review on the site, right? That it was, straight to streaming, so it would be worth checking out. But anyway, so that was the thing with that. So that was the decision that brought me to looking at Predator, and I'm excited to talk about Predator. Predator is just such a great movie, and I'm just and Predator 2 as well. So I'm really geeked to be able to discuss these. There might be a lot of swearing, so we might be using that explicit tag here, just because when an action movie is so good, it's hard not to swear when you're discussing it. So we might see that happen as well. Now, as I get into the discussion on Predator, one of the things I wanted to bring up is kind of dovetailing a little bit from the Marvel discussion, where I would be comparing the Marvel movies to some of like the Fox movies that came out at the same time, especially the X movies. One of the things I discovered recently, I was reading up on this a little bit, is that when Disney took over Marvel, when they bought out Marvel in the late 2000s, early 2010s, suddenly the focus on Marvel comics and everything changed because now Disney had a stake in certain comics doing well and other ones not doing well because now they had competitors of theirs that were making Marvel movies at the same time. So the biggest one was the X-Men, right? Like there was a sense from Disney's standpoint, especially Ike Perlmutter, was that they didn't want to do Fox any favors by having books that featured X-Men in the comics and having kids go from the comics to going to see the films. And so what they did, I know there was one storyline where I think it was Scarlet Witch depressed the powers of the X-Men, and so all mutants had lesser powers, and they were kind of raising the profile of the Avengers. And it kind of, when you look at it, it explains some of those box office returns for some of those really good X movies that probably could have been billion-dollar earners, but for me, I wasn't collecting comics at that time, so I had no idea about this, what was happening here. But when I really think about it, for example, my nephew was born in '06, so it's crazy. He's going to be 18 next month. So it's kind of crazy to think that it's been that long. But I remember, when he was collecting, it was all like Iron Man, not comic books necessarily, but action figures and things like that. And if I really think about it, when we would go to like Toys R Us or Walmart or any of those places to get toys from, because a lot of times my mom would be watching when I would be hanging out and helping out with my mom with watching him, and we would go to those places, and it was always kind of fun to pick out toys and things like that, kind of just to to be a kid again in that sense. But when I think about it, there really wasn't any X characters in those places. Like, there really weren't like a lot of Lego sets that were X characters. There weren't action figures of like Wolverine and, Cyclops and Jean Grey and all of that crew, Storm, whoever. They were all of the Avengers, right? The Avengers were the ones that were being spotlighted. And this, of course, is, I'm talking about, so he was born in '06. So this would have been '09, 10, 11. So as you're getting into where Disney's taking over, right, they really start to put the kibosh on that. And so it's an interesting thing now, right, when we think about the fact that, Disney for so long, as in running Marvel, they were putting the focus on diminishing the X products, probably diminishing Fantastic Four. They probably doing the same thing with Spider-Man if it hadn't been for Spider-Man making that deal with Sony, right, to put out movies in conjunction with each other. They probably would have been doing the same thing there. And so now, of course, it looks like the kind of the product that's going to maybe save them is Deadpool. And when you think about Deadpool, the interesting thing, right, is that he was sort of like diminishment proof, if that's a great way to say it, right? That no matter what they did to diminish the X characters, Deadpool was always one that was always more popular. And I remember, this match 3 game that I play, Marvel Puzzle Quest, which is a really great time killer. I remember they would do a lot of things that would feature Deadpool. But I remember there was a period of time in that mid-2010s range, and right around the same time that this article that I was reading, some of the other things I was reading talked about how Marvel was trying to shelve the X-Men at that time. And I remember in the game, because the game, like every couple weeks, they'd roll out a new Marvel character. And so it'd either be like a brand new character or a new version of a character. So like, Wolverine had like 4 different versions and things like that. But I remember that there was a period of time where it was like maybe like 2 years where they didn't put out a single X character. And it was one of those things where like people on Reddit and in the forums and stuff were starting to complain about it. Like, hey, we get it, Disney. You don't want Fox characters on here, but this is a little bit much because this game is not a Disney game. It's supposed to be for all of us. And they kind of broke with it, and they just started to release some X characters. That's when we got like Rogue and Gambit and people like that in the game. But I didn't really put 2 and 2 together to think like, oh, if they're doing that in the video game, they're doing the same thing with the comic books. I don't know if you can hear the sirens going on in the background here. The Disney police are coming to arrest me for talking bad about them. But anyway, so, but it's interesting because, from Fox's standpoint, I think they were still trying to break through despite the fact that Disney was kind of really putting everything against them with those X movies. And of course, right, when Disney buys out Fox, they pretty much kill Dark Phoenix. They just, I think it gets released and it does barely anything. I've heard that it's a good or a bad movie. I haven't heard either way. Some people have said it's good, some it's bad. But I guess where I'm going with this and kind of where this is starting to dovetail with the Predator thing is Disney owns all of this stuff now, right? For the most part. And they kind of, there's talk about like them wanting to only work with like real kind of, bankable projects or ones that are less risky. And so it's one of those things where they can get to shelve whatever they want to shelve and only work with certain things. Another interesting I heard, because I wasn't sure what exactly Disney bought from Fox when they bought 20th Century Fox, but it looks like all of the TV shows, but not the reality shows, I think, because if you watch Tubi, I think like shows like the Gordon Ramsay shows and things like that, I don't think those are owned by Disney. I think those are, because Fox still has its own entertainment branch. Was it Murder City, the Tubi original I did? I think that was like some kind of a Fox production. They've got like a few productions or something like that. But Family Guy is one of the ones that Disney now owns. And I guess Disney's editorial people have told like the Family Guy people, like, yeah, you can't make that joke about a Marvel character. You can't, we don't want that Marvel character in that light, seen in that light. And they said like, well, what if we just tried it and see if people think it's funny? And they're like, no, that's not how we work. We don't do it that way. So they're already censoring the Family Guy. And I think, as we look at Predator here, one of the concerns that I have, I think, is that, Predator is such a great franchise. And when it was just Fox, right, when they were owned by Fox and they were kind of one of the bigger, I think from Fox's standpoint, right, it probably would have been like the X characters as the top one, right, and then Predator would have been a little further down the list on there, but it still would have been something that was important for them, right? That would have been a priority for them. Now with Disney, right, I mean, where would Predator slot in as a priority for Disney, right? I mean, you've got Star Wars, you've got Marvel, but even within Star Wars and Marvel, right, there's priority lists even there, right, on what things that they think are important within those franchises that they would want to use or not use. Things like Indiana Jones, whether they would use that or not. And so it's going to be interesting as we talk about the Predator movies to kind of see like what their future is going to be now that they are owned by Disney. I mean, yes, one of the benefits is that I can get them all on Hulu, and I think there's sort of a upcoming thing. 'Cause I think the way it works with Hulu is that Disney owns 2/3 of it because they bought Fox's third, and then Comcast owns the other third, I think. And so then I don't know if there's a sort of an idea where I think Disney's maybe taking that last third from Comcast or buying it out or something. Because I know like one of the things like they're trying to merge those two together, Disney and Hulu. And I know I think like if you notice the app for Disney has changed recently. So I mean it's one of those realities. I mean Disney. When you think of Walt Disney as a a historical figure, someone who is what he was like. I mean, he was someone who his whole sort of raison d'etre was exploiting workers, right? That was his whole point. Was just consuming, making money, making as much money as he could. I think it was what Snow White, right? Was kind of like the big breakthrough one that really made their business. And his mindset was, well, I'm not going to pay my workers with that money from Snow White. I'm going to build a bigger campus, right? And so we can pump out more movies and stuff like that. And that was when the workers decided they had to unionize because they were like, we're just not getting any money. We're not getting, we're not getting our share of this. And of course, he hated that as well. And you see it kind of throughout kind of the Disney process that like, yeah, it's not a great place. And so I think there is a bit of a concern of like, okay, what's going to happen to some of these properties that we really like? But for the next few of these DTVC Extra episodes here, we're going to celebrate Predator, the Predator that we have right now, and hopefully, in the coming years, Disney will be able to make something. I mean, again, the fact that Prey is there on Hulu as a sort of a Hulu original, I think for Predator, I think a Hulu original is not bad. I don't necessarily need big screen Predator. I'm okay with it being done on that kind of scale, and so hopefully maybe that's where they go with that kind of thing. But it's for us as fans of a lot of these genre films and a lot of these franchises, it is a little bit of an uncertain time. That Disney's purchases like that has means that like characters that we like or that we really want to see in other things we may not see them for a while. If again, and I know for Marvel fans they're looking at it as like okay, what's going to happen with are we going to get another Black Panther movie or another Captain Marvel or something like that, because again they're looking at where they're going to make their money on those kinds of movies. But I think with these other franchises, I mean, if you go to Disney Plus, you don't see any Predator stuff, right? I mean, Predator is Predator's not a Disney thing, right? It's considered too rated R, right? So it's definitely there on Hulu for sure. But yeah, I mean, it's going to be interesting to see what happens there. But anyway, why don't we kind of we'll table that conversation and kind of maybe I'll probably kind of be threading that conversation throughout as I'm talking about the movies here. But yeah, why don't we get in on the first Predator? So I mean, normally I do a synopsis of the movie, but do I need to do a synopsis of Predator? Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I remember back in like the early 2000s, I was with some friends, and we went to one of the friends had like they were like. The parents like lived in like a religious camp or something during the summer. That didn't make a lot of sense, but we would go party there, I guess, when the parents weren't there or something. But anyway, this kid I'd never met before, he's talking with my friends and I, and he's like, "Have you ever seen Stand By Me?" And I got really mad. I was drunk, and you know, we're all kind of my friends and I were all kind of, you know, in a mood anyway. And I was like, you don't ask somebody if they've seen Stand By Me. You just say, remember that scene in Stand By Me? Everybody's seen Stand By Me, you know. And then I had a similar moment in an earlier episode of the podcast back when Jamie was the co-host. I asked her, I was like, have you seen Point Break? And she was like, yes, I've seen Point Break. And I kind of felt like the same way that I made that kid feel, you know, of like, you know, of course everybody's seen Point Break. So I mean, it's like, yeah, telling you what happened in The Predator, I don't think is necessary, right? We've seen this before, and we've seen it. And I was trying to think of the last time I had seen it. I can't remember when that would have been. It would have been a while ago. I mean, maybe more than 10 years. It's one of those movies that comes out every once in a while that like, hey, you want to watch, you know, if you're hanging out with people, somebody will just pop it on. Hey, you want to watch Predator? Let's do, you know, it's there. Or sometimes you just see it on cable or something and you just have to watch it. I saw when I was looking through the Wikipedia article on it a little bit, there were some lists of like top action movies of all time. I think Entertainment Weekly had one, or maybe it was Daily or Variety, one of those ones where they listed it 10th. And it's like, you look at some of the movies that are above it and it's just like, this is not a list. This is not a list with integrity, I would say. And I have that term from a sports writer that has a radio show out of Boston. His name is Mike Felger. Whenever he's talking about like players, as they're like sort of making their way up certain lists of all-time players, you know, if they with the points that they've scored in their sport, or you know, different things that they've done, different accomplishments that they've had, and he'll say like, oh, this is a list with integrity, meaning there's other good players on this list, and so that means it matters. Whereas if there's not other good players on the list, because sometimes people just have, you know, a lot of, you know, they score a lot or something like that. Like probably the best example is in basketball. They always talk about we always talk about as rings, right? How many championships have you won? But when a player wins a championship in American sports, they get a ring for that. So it's always like, how many rings do you have? And there's this player, Robert Ory, who was sort of like a role player, like a bench guy that would play for, he played for a lot of teams that won championships. I think he won 7 championships. And so it's like, well, I mean, you know, if you go based on who has the most rings, right, the most championships, are you saying that Robert Ory is better than Michael Jordan, who had 6 championships, or LeBron James, who had 4? It's like, no, right? That's not a list with integrity, right? Just having championships. It's more like, you know, you got to have something else there to factor in that list. And I would say these action lists were not. I mean, this one that I mentioned here, this first one here, like I said, it had like you know, like Mad Max Fury Road, I think, above it. It was, I think, it was number 22 on the list, which I cannot think of 22 action movies that I would put above Predator, the first Predator movie. There's no way that there's that many movies. But it had that feel, the Entertainment Weekly one, it had that feel of like millennial who was born in like 87, 88, who hadn't seen many movies from before then, and didn't really understand how to judge them properly. You know, there was a lot more modern stuff on there. And then the Rolling Stone one that I looked at, it came in 4th on that one, which I thought was good, right? Okay, that's probably more of where I would put that movie. But then it had Born Identity as like the number 3, and it's like, okay, definitely not a list with integrity, right? If you've got a Matt Damon helmed actioner above one of the all-time greats in Predator, yeah, that's I can't respect your list there. So, you know, I was trying to think for myself where I would put it all time. I think there are a few that you got to put above. I mean, I think Terminator 2, I think, is one that is definitely above Predator. I think Die Hard, I think just in terms of like what Die Hard meant and all of that. Though watching Predator again, especially having seen, and I've seen Die Hard relatively recently as well, comparing Predator to it, there is a lot of really great stuff though going on in there that it's hard to even compare. I don't know. Predator's it's that good. But I mean, Die Hard, maybe you can make a case, right? Another one's maybe The Matrix, which I don't know if it's the first Matrix or the second Matrix that I would put if I was going to try to put one in. Again, I don't know that I put either of them above Predator, but I would understand the argument if somebody was making it. That, you know, I think it's the second Predator where the second Matrix for me is when they have that huge chase scene where like the The directors built their own highway to be able to shoot it, which I thought was really great. I mean, the other thing too is I think one of the things you could say about Bourne Identity and The Matrix that is a negative is that both of them poorly influenced, right, the film industry. I mean, how many times as us as DTV fans did we get like bullet cam or bullet shot or whatever, like the slow motion of the bullet going and all that kind of stuff? It was obnoxious. So, in that sense, I think maybe I'm a little bit more biased against The Matrix than I should be, but that's one thing. And then, thinking about something like a Hard Boiled, right? John Woo. I mean, that's probably my favorite John Woo. It's probably up there. I mean, I think for movies of the 80s, it's one of my favorite 80s movies. That one I would put above Predator. I think that one is that good that you could make that case. But, I mean, yeah, I mean, and like Commando, for example. Commando's another one of my all-time favorites. I put Predator above Commando. I like Predator, but I mean, Commando is right there for me too. Thinking about some of the other ones like the Stallones or the Chuck Norrises. I mean, yeah, I mean, Invasion USA is just an absolutely fantastic movie. But I don't think I'd put it above Predator, right? I don't think I would make that case. Some of the Rambos. I mean, Rambo 3 is just so bonkers, right? First Blood Part 2, right, where he's got the explosive tipped arrows and he's blowing up helicopters with them. I mean, that's another level as well. So, I mean, there's some really great stuff out there. I mean, we were lucky, I think, as fans in the 80s into the 90s with the kind of stuff that we had. And there was something about watching this movie again where it just has that feel of a late 80s, early 90s big screen film. The film quality itself, there's almost like I don't want to say it's a washed out quality, but there's like a tone, like a tint to the film. There's a color to it and a look and a feel to it that just feels like you're just like being wrapped in a nice warm blanket. There's a comfort level there that's just amazing, which of course I'm saying that while I'm describing, an action movie where, you've got scenes of like just people being ripped apart by machine guns, and you've got the Predator himself just destroying people. But yeah, this is, if you're going to make a list of all-time action movies, and this isn't in the top 5, but also if this isn't ahead of every Matt Damon action-led movie, there's, when you see Arnold Schwarzenegger in this movie, it's like a reminder, if you needed one, of who, why he, I think he is probably the greatest action star ever, just because, if you look at like, how larger than life he is in this movie, how fantastic he is here. But it's also like this feeling when you watch the movie of like, yeah, Arnold's here. He's going to take care of business. And his stuff that comes out in the 90s, I'm not as big of a fan of. But, when you look at, Terminator 1 and 2, you look at this movie, you look at Commando, those are just all time, just absolute best movies that that you could put those in on a night and just watch them, and they're not that long either. This Predator movie is like an hour and 45 minutes, and it's like I think it's another thing that I kind of realized that my brain from watching those MCU movies where in those later phases they all are over 2 hours, but they're pushing 2.5 hours in most cases. And of course, when I get into the third phase, they're going to be like 2.5 hours pushing 3 hours, right? If I start watching those, to be in and out in an hour and 45 minutes. And the other thing too about this Predator movie that really hit me is the fact that it feels like there's no wasted space here. Like this movie just jumps in and it gets moving, right? So you get this sort of initial scene of the guys, landing on the beach, and Schwarzenegger goes in and he gets debriefed. That's when we meet Carl Weathers' character. Of course, for a lot of kids, right, famous meme, right, when he does like the overhead handshake with Carl Weathers. I don't know if you growing up, if you had if your parents had friends who were hippies or whatever, who gave you the overhand handshake instead of like the straightforward handshake. I know my uncle, my aunt, my mom's older sister's husband, he would always do the overhead handshake when you'd say goodbye to him or something like that. So fortunately, he passed away a couple of years ago. But so he was big on that. So they give themselves the overhand handshake, and then there's like a kind of a squeeze off thing, right, where it's almost like an in air, like kind of floating arm wrestle thing where Schwarzenegger's kind of pushing his arm down. And of course, we know the meme, right, for that, where it's like the two people grabbing each other, and then it's like it's like almost like two people coming from convergent places having a similar focus or having a similar goal, or I guess like a common enemy, or something like that, right? That's the meme. And you do wonder how many kids have seen that meme and don't know what it's from, right? Don't know what movie it is. Don't they just see it. Maybe they think it's Rocky, maybe they think it's Stallone and Apollo Creed or something like that. They don't realize that it's Schwarzenegger and Carl Weathers doing that from The Predator, which is really kind of funny to think about like that. For us growing up, when we grew up, I was born in '79, so this movie came out when I was 8. I don't remember it necessarily. I remember it being in the theaters, but I remember watching it myself on VHS after the fact. Same with Second Predator, I watched on VHS. But I don't really remember a time without Predator necessarily. Like I don't remember, like it was like always watching the Predator was something we always watched. It was something that you just understood. You got it. You got the lines. You said the lines. All that kind of stuff. One of the things I remember in high school, my senior year of high school, the high school that I went to, they went from sort of like the normal like 45-minute period schedules to like this block scheduling thing where classes would go an hour and a half, but you wouldn't have the class every day. It was a weird thing. And it was even weirder when it came to labs. And we had physics at the end of the day. And I remember our physics teacher was out, so we had a substitute, and she didn't understand how the scheduling system went, so she came in 20 minutes late to the class, and we had already taken over the classroom, right? We were doing whatever. And I think I had a VHS copy of Predator. I don't remember if I was borrowing it or if I was lending it to somebody, but it was definitely like something that was copied from a super long play, right? The tape, the label on it with the word Predator written in handwriting on it. But for people growing up in the States especially, right, you remember at that time in the 90s, if you were in high school, or 80s, but definitely in the 90s, right, where you'd have the TV on the wheeled cart that had the VCR on it. That's what we had in here. And I just popped Predator on that thing, and we started watching it. And the sub, she didn't know what to do. She was an older lady. She didn't know how to handle it. She was kind of stuck with us all watching Predator in physics class. And I remember, the scene where Billy Duke gets killed, right, where he just gets blasted and his brains end up on the rock there. I was like, isn't that awesome? And she was like, no, it's horrible. Then like, of course, the scene when Schwarzenegger goes, "You're one ugly motherfucker." Like, everybody in the class cheered, right? We all just loved it and everything. So, that's Predator, right? Predator is that big of a deal. It's that kind of thing. And watching this again took me back to all of that. I loved all of it. You get the scene, right? Of course, you get the scene where Carl Weathers is there with Schwarzenegger, and it's pretty set up. It's set up pretty right away, right? That we can't trust Carl Weathers. And it's one of the things I kind of forgot about Carl Weathers with him passing recently. A lot of the things were kind of coming to light about, or not coming to light. People were celebrating his career, right, and talking about a lot of the great work he did, which I think is, I was in the same boat, right? He's done so much great stuff. But I'd forgotten how many heels he played, right? That he, obviously the first Rocky movie, he's a heel, right? He kind of becomes better after, which I guess maybe he was the inspiration for Vin Diesel, right? Making all the bad guys into good guys in later iterations of his films. But he's a heel there. Friday Foster, right? He's the bad guy. Yaphet Kotto's the one helping Pam Grier, but Weathers is the baddie in that one. He's kind of heel, not heel, right? I guess he's kind of back and forth in The Mandalorian, but I guess he's kind of more good guy there, right? I think actually, if we think about it, Giancarlo Esposito, maybe who was really bad in that one, but. So I kind of forgot that he wasn't always Action Jackson or Hurricane Smith, right? Or even Apollo Creed that we remember, from like the fourth movie. He played heels pretty often. He was good at it, right? He played a good heel. And so, he's great here. And obviously Schwarzenegger right away, just like, I'd kind of forgotten. I hadn't seen young Schwarzenegger in a while. And he was just fantastic. It's funny, I have a friend who lifts weights I used to go hiking with. I haven't talked to him in a while since I moved down here to Philadelphia, but he was a big bodybuilder, and his facial structure is kind of similar, and so it's kind of reminding me of him too, watching Schwarzenegger in this movie. But yeah, so we kind of set the players up right away, right? That we've got Schwarzenegger, who's this larger than life mercenary guy smoking a cigar and hanging out, and that Weathers is the baddie, or not the baddie, but the heel, right? And we can't trust him, and that nothing is probably going to be what it seems. We also get the idea that that there is something landed on Earth, right? Something from outer space landed on Earth. And then, the guys go and they raid what they think is like, this rebel compound or something like that, this terrorist group. And that scene alone that should get you a top 5 in an action movie, right? That scene was just fantastic. I mean, and what the best part is Schwarzenegger, where he's like lifting this old truck up off the ground and then like pushing it forward, loaded with explosives and like ready for it to go blow everything up. And then of course like the shooting all happens. I mean, it's just an absolute thing of beauty. And so then of course, this is when the movie starts to turn, right? After they've raided this compound and they realize things maybe aren't quite what they seem, but then they come across the bodies, right? The skinned bodies. And so now it kind of moves into this realm of like action horror movie, which is great in itself, right? That the Predator is sort of like this monster, right, that's coming to get them. But the thing I love about the Predator, I think the thing that makes the Predator so great, right, is that the Predator is not there. Every time we get the alien invasion movie, right, the alien is coming to conquer us, right? Right. The alien wants to take over everything, and our plucky heroes have to stop them from taking over everything. That's not what's happening here. I mean, this idea that the Predator is just there to hunt, right? And he's got all these great hunting tools that he uses that makes the hunt a little bit easier for himself. That concept, I think, is just it endures so much. It's something that's always really great. Because this isn't like, so one, it's not like your traditional alien invasion movie, right, where the aliens are coming to take over and they've got superior forces and we have to figure out a way to stop them. But at the same time, it's not your traditional, what would we say, like most dangerous game kind of movie, right, where you capture some humans and you let them go run on a in a compound or something like that, and you try to hunt them. This is some alien being coming from another place and hunting humans in their natural habitat, right? Hunting them where, letting them be where they are, and kind of the way that you would think of like somebody going on safari or something and hunting animals where they live, right? And so that concept I think is just absolutely fantastic. It just works. And so it mixes all those genres, right? Where you get the horror elements there of the slasher film kind of thing, but then the action elements. I mean the scene where Jesse the Body gets murdered, or not murdered, but he gets killed by the Predator, and then Billy Duke just picks up the gun and starts just destroying the jungle in front of him. But then also his Schwarzenegger and everybody else shows up with their guns and they start blowing it away too. They're just going through bullet after bullet, just like destroying the thing there, right? That's not something that you see in a traditional slasher film, right? That's an action element there that's just beautiful, right? That's something it's just fantastic to see. And of course, that all the shooting's done, and then they realize like, okay, well, I had to have killed her, right? It couldn't have escaped that, And then, of course, we find out that it bleeds, that the Predator bleeds like fluorescent green blood. And so then, later on, when the woman who was captured by Carl Weathers, who's with them, she tells them that it was, she found out it was bleeding. And that's when Schwarzenegger says, well, if it bleeds, we can kill it, right? Which is like, that's one of the best lines ever in the history of movies. And I mean, the other thing, too, right, of course, is with that character, with that woman, when he captures her and takes her along, you kind of wonder what the point is of her, right? Like, why would they be taking her with them? But it's because it's telling parts of the story about the character, right? And the idea that, like, from the Predator's standpoint, there's no point in killing her because she's unarmed. It would be too easy for him to kill her. He wants to kill something that's a challenge, right? Something that could potentially kill him back, I guess, right, is what you're saying. That's the idea there. Yeah, I mean, obviously, too, when you've got the what is it? The the kind of the mercenary group idea. We get these characters, right? And what's amazing about it is, you think about it from a movie standpoint or even a book or anything like that, where you've got to kind of describe 5 or 6 people like that. They don't really do that. Now, granted, there's some of the characters we don't know as well, but some of them are pretty easy, right? Like, okay, Bill Duke, he's got a really great personality that we just kind of see right away. We know who that is. I'm trying to think, obviously Jesse the Body Ventura, right? I mean, just, again, another larger than life kind of character. I mean, one of the interesting things, right, when you think about this movie, and you can say the same thing about The Running Man, right, is that this movie produced 2 U.S. state governors, right? Because we've got Arnold Schwarzenegger became governor of California, and then we've got Jesse the Body, right, who became governor of Minnesota. Sonny Landham is a really great character in this. whether being a tracker, but also kind of the one who first recognizes that the Punisher's out there, first sees him. So there's a lot of really, really great elements here that make this the kind of classic that it is. But at the same time, just from an action standpoint, it hits all the points that you want it to hit. This is a classic for a reason. I think watching it again was almost like a reminder, because I was watching all those Marvel movies, and I mean there was some of those Marvel movies are really good, right? Some of them are they're really solid, but I mean, from my own personal taste, there was nothing out of any of those 12 movies that I watched that hit anywhere near the highs that this movie did for me. It's like I can't say enough great about it. Like, just how fantastic this movie is, and again with Schwarzenegger as well. I mean, it's interesting with the different franchises between the Predator and the Terminator franchise, right? Because with the Terminator movies, they got Schwarzenegger back, right? So you essentially, I mean, Schwarzenegger kicked off two big action franchises, right, with Predator and Terminator. Those are both movies where they kept trying to kind of put movies in the theater, kind of keep producing products. And I mean, with Predator, of course, it's not just the movies, right, but it's comic books, it's books, TV, all that kind of stuff. And then Terminator, right, TV shows, movies, things like that as well. But it's interesting with the Terminator ones, right, they kind of kept bringing him back, right? They kept paying for him and kept bringing him back. It would be interesting to see if they ever bring him back for one of these. Like, maybe even if he's just like, sitting in a recliner somewhere telling his story to somebody about what happened, and while at the same time, the Predator's there doing his Predator stuff. But it is interesting that, like, with the two franchises went off in a different, kind of divergent way, right? Where Predator kind of did it on their own. We'll get into episode, movie number 2, right? We'll be talking about the Danny Glover, taking over as the lead. Whereas again, with the Terminator movies, they kept bringing Schwarzenegger back to be in those. And I can't remember if it was 2 or 3, right? That he was like, he wasn't really interested in doing it, and they were just like, I think it was James Cameron said, well, if they're going to throw a bunch of money at you, you should just make the movie. And so he did. But he really was that larger than life in the 80s into the 90s. And as great as someone like Robert Downey Jr. is as Iron Man, or Chris Hemsworth as Thor. I mean, Chris Hemsworth as Thor is probably like the best comp for what we've got here with Schwarzenegger. And as great as Hemsworth is as Thor, right? You just see right away. It's like you could take the Pepsi challenge with Schwarzenegger in his roles versus Hemsworth in his roles, right? And you get Schwarzenegger all day. We just don't have quite that. I think we want The Rock to be that. We want Vin Diesel to be that. But Schwarzenegger in these movies, that was it. And even Stallone, right? Who Stallone was great in Rocky. He was great in Rambo, in Cobra as well. And I think Stallone had that, he had that competition with Schwarzenegger. But, when you watch them both together, when you watch them, if you watch their movies back to back, there's just something about that Schwarzenegger that he's the greatest of all time. And I love Dolph. Obviously, that's no secret. In all the movies that I've reviewed of Dolph's and how much I think he's great. I mean, Dolph was probably the one, right, that I think they thought could be in that Schwarzenegger vein, and he could make it work, right? And I think, as good as Dolph was, and I don't know what Schwarzenegger would have done if they had put Schwarzenegger in Masters of the Universe, right? If he was He-Man instead of Dolph, because of how big of a flop that movie was, how that would have worked out for him. But I think that's, obviously that's what really hurts his career with Dolph, and kind of puts him in the DTV realm, because then, Punisher doesn't get released here in the U.S. and it just doesn't quite work out. I mean, Dolph is probably like the one who potentially could have been the Schwarzenegger. But, and then, of course, what ends up happening, right, too, is that it's like, okay, we can't create a new Schwarzenegger, so let's create a new concept instead. Let's do something different than Schwarzenegger. So we'll do, like, a Bruce Willis, right, who's like a smaller actor, and have him just kind of grit it out, right, in the Die Hard movies and things like that. Or we've got martial artists, right, like Seagal and Van Damme. We'll have them be in these movies, and that will kind of do it differently. But there's just nothing like this, and there's nothing like these movies that he puts out here in the late 80s into the 90s. And watching this again was a reminder of just how good that was, and just how fantastic. So I think that kind of is a good place for me to leave this. I mean, I think if you haven't seen this in, I would say, if it's been 5 years since the last time you saw it, you should go on Hulu and fire this thing up. It's worth it. It's worth checking out. I mean, you may own it as well. I don't own it. I used to have it. Like I said, I think I used to to have it on VHS, but it's been a while since I've last since I've owned it. So but I don't have a lot of room at my apartment, so I can't own a lot of physical media. So it's great that I can just fire up Hulu and make this one happen. And it's a reminder. I think it's one of those things. I think for all of us that are huge action fans, I think sometimes we got to go back and watch these ones, because for us that grew up in a certain time window, grew up, especially being born in sort of the late 70s, early 80s, we kind of grew up with these movies in a certain way. Like these were kind of the ones that influenced us and what we think of as action. What we look for in a movie like this. I think for younger audiences, right, they're more likely to put like a Marvel movie above this. They're more likely to put like a Mad Max Fury Road above this, or something like that. And part of that is because I think their sensibilities are not going to let them like this the way that we like it. It's just sort of, you're brought up in it. You're kind of a product of the age that you're from. And, I'm not saying everybody that's younger won't like this movie. I think if you put everybody under a bell curve, though, I think the bell curve would kind of put like maybe enjoying this ironically, or not fully being able to comprehend it the way that this movie should be comprehended. And that's why, you get action movie lists where this is, 22nd, right? And it's below all kinds of stuff that it shouldn't be below. Because it's not always easy to appreciate. So I think it's one of the things I feel lucky about being born at the time that I was, that and I think people that are slightly older, of course, as well, are going to understand this on that level. Just understanding how fantastic this movie is, and knowing that it is not it's not the fourth best movie behind a Bourne Identity movie or anything like that. No, this is the real deal. And yeah, if you haven't seen this in a while, like I hadn't seen it in maybe a decade, it'd been a while, fire it up and watch it, and just even if you know everything's going to happen. I mean, I've seen this so many times that I knew everything that was going to happen, and it was still just as amazing watching it happen, every time. So yeah, this is a movie. It doesn't get old. It's always fantastic. And so, yeah, well, we'll wrap that here, and we'll take a break. When we come back, we will talk about Predator 2 with Danny Glover. It's the early 90s in L.A. The war on drugs is raging, and Detective John Bainbridge is the LAPD's secret weapon against crime. Former Special Forces in Nam, he's a cop on the edge. When he and his partner Geary uncover a potential human trafficking ring, it doesn't take long before John Bainbridge realizes this thing goes all the way to the top, which doesn't scare him. That just means they'll fall that much harder when he takes them down. Part send-up and part love letter to early 90s action films, Bainbridge will take you back to the golden days of Canon, PM Entertainment, and AIP. You can get it in paperback or on Kindle and Kindle Unlimited from Amazon. Follow the link in the podcast description. My newest novel, Don's House in the Mountains, is available now. It follows Don Veazey, who after 20 years has finally made it as a writer, going from an AP English teacher to richer and more famous than he ever could have imagined. In the process, his wife Lois, feeling alienated and resentful of her husband's success, has filed for divorce, forcing Don to move to a house in the White Mountains of New Hampshire. With time alone to reflect, he's able to see how his new wealth and fame has affected his life in ways he never expected. Maybe the biggest of these is his new house, which is bigger and nicer than anything he's ever had in his entire life, but the longer he lives there, the more he gets the sense that it might have magical powers. But that can't be right. A house can't have magical powers, can it? Pick up Don's House in the Mountains today. You can find it at Amazon in paperback and in Kindle. All right, we are back, and we are looking at Predator 2. So one of the interesting things about this movie is there was a period of time where I said I liked this one better than the first one. I don't know. Maybe it was because this was years ago, probably 10, 15 years ago. But I think it's just I always loved the idea of this movie, and so I'm really excited to talk about it. And I watched it again. I don't remember the last time I'd seen this one, so it had been a long time since I'd seen part 2. And again, it's on Hulu, so it's really great to be able to kind of do them both together like this and see them. There were some interesting things that I learned about this when I was looking it up on Wikipedia that I hadn't known before. So one of these things we talked about in the previous segment, I was talking about how Schwarzenegger came back for the Terminator movies, but not for the Predator movies. Well, he was supposed to be in this movie, and he declined because it was dispute over the salary, right? So he didn't end up doing. So they threw a pile of cash at him to get him in the Terminator movies, but they didn't do the same for the Predator ones. And so, of course, this movie is produced. It's produced by Joel Silver, who I believe he produced the Lethal Weapon movies. So that's where we get Danny Glover in here. That's where we get Gary Busey, which, I mean, you gotta love when an action movie is abusive, and this one's definitely abusive. So that works out as well. And then in terms of kind of the idea for this movie, right? So, thinking of 1990 in the United States and kind of what the environment was, is actually kind of similar to what the environment is here now in 2024, where there's crime, right? There's this sort of this enhanced level of crime, right? Where I live in Philadelphia, right? There's it's a little more dangerous now than it was probably pre-pandemic. I'm not usually out after 9 o'clock at night. I'll go to a sporting event and come back, but I'm not usually going too far from home at that time. There was a night recently I went to a Sixers game. Oh, no, it was a Flyers game. My buddy and I went and saw the hockey game, and on the way back, my wife needed me to pick up something, and the CVS on the way back from the game was closed. It closed early at 10, so it used to be a 24-hour. A lot of 24-hour places have stopped being open 24 hours because of the crime here in the city. And so 10:30 at night, I was going to the 7-Eleven around the corner. For the most part, it seemed okay, and then it's like I'm in there like shopping, and there's a dude who just comes in and just starts swearing and just angry, just kind of slamming things around. And I felt bad for the guy behind the counter because I was like, I'm getting the hell out of here. I'm getting my stuff and getting out of here. But so there was definitely more crime. But on the other hand, it's not like this post-apocalyptic wasteland here in Philadelphia, right? Like I can ride the subway and go run errands and things like that, and I'm perfectly safe in that. So. Yeah, so you don't necessarily go out at night, but it's also not the post-apocalyptic wasteland that like especially conservative media or even just regular media, sort of like trying to get eyes on TV. There's this idea that urban spaces are much more violent now than they really are, as a way to sort of gin up support for political causes and things like that. And we had a similar environment here in the United States in the late 80s, early 90s, because there's the whole we talked about the crack epidemic, and then which led to the war on drugs, which led to over incarceration, especially of people of color, mandatory minimums. You had things like Police Chief Daryl Gates, with battering ram, smashing down houses, all that kind of thing. And so there was this sense that things that were getting out of control, and that definitely LA was LA was definitely an area where you looked at that and said, okay, LA is one of those places, right, that you don't want to go to LA because you're going to get hurt or something like that. And I remember I was at Bowling for Columbine, I think it was, where Michael Moore and somebody else were just like hanging out in Compton, just being like, yeah, we're safe here. Nobody's trying to kill us. Nobody wants to hurt us. So and again, I don't know if that I would go to Compton or something like that, or an area that does have a high crime rate. I wouldn't necessarily go there just to go there. But it's also not the sense that like it's this post-apocalyptic wasteland that you're just you're suddenly walking onto the set of an Italian post-apocalyptic thriller produced by Roger Corman in the late 80s or the early 80s with Richard Norton wearing a vest and no shirt underneath it with a spiked car. That's what the American cities are like. But that was the projection. That was the image that you got on popular media both at that time and this time. And that really plays out in this movie here. So we get the Rodney King police beating in he gets almost killed by the police. He was beaten up by them in March of 1991, and then of course, so that's a year after this film comes out. And then of course when 1992, right, when those police officers who tried to beat him to death are exonerated, right, even though they're on film beating him to death. When they were exonerated, there's the LA riots, right, that happen after that. Obviously that's a completely separate thing, and it's its own kind of unique situation that happened there. But it's not really indicative of the fact that LA was this sort of post-apocalyptic, crime-ridden, area there that you just, you couldn't exist in. But there was that war on drugs that kind of led to, again, overly aggressive policing that led to a situation like with Rodney King, which was a more common situation than people wanted to talk about or admit. And it also kind of led to this kind of mindset for people who were outside of the suburbs, myself living, outside of the city, that I obviously I was too young to vote then. I was like 11, 12 years old, but people that were voting age at that time would vote for these aggressive policing laws and mandatory minimums and all of that kind of stuff, because there was this mindset that it was all this runaway out of control thing, and it was that unless we started to put things into action, the criminals were going to take over all of our cities, and we would have no country back. And that's the mindset that you get in this film here. So this movie takes place in 1997, so it's supposed to take place 10 years after the first Predator. So that's why they said it in 1997. But the idea was, right, is that they were looking at LA in the late 80s, early 90s as this place that where crime was out of control, because that was the perception of it. And they thought, okay, wheel it forward 7 years, and now it's just going to be a complete war zone in LA, right? And so that's what the Punishers dropped into, is that we have this sort of drug war going on between sort of like a Latin American cartel and the Jamaican cartel, with this big shootout, and the Punisher is almost like, or not, sorry, the Predator is going into this environment as almost like it's like a target-rich environment. It's almost like kind of like the perfect place, right, for a real hunter, right? To, it's real dangerous, and if you can survive this, you're doing really well. So then we get Danny Glover, right? And so, of course, now what's happened here, right, is that without Schwarzenegger in the movie, right, we're really transitioning to a completely different type of hero here. I know I was also reading Wikipedia. It's really interesting. They thought about having Seagal. They considered Seagal for the role of Danny Glover's. But, the script was calling for kind of an average Joe kind of character who just survives and just really just kind of, uses his wit and his guile to get through everything. And Seagal wanted to be like some like CIA agent guy, which, sound familiar, right? Like every DTV movie that he's done, right? Where he's some sort of former CIA or something like that. Like I think he would have wanted the knowledge dump thing. Even back then, even in 1990, he wanted the knowledge dump scene, right? Which when Scott Murphy of All 90s Action All the Time, when he's on, we talk about Seagal, we talk about that knowledge dump scene where somebody just talks about how he's the baddest man ever, and just like lists off his CV with all this great stuff that he's done. Even back then, he wanted that, and it cost him a chance to be in Predator 2, which I think we're better for it, right? We're better for it being Danny Glover in the role. Some other things you could look at, I mean, thinking about the fact that, the first movie you could almost say is like John Matrix, right, from Commando, right, is fighting the Predator, right? That's, essentially the Dutch character is very much the Matrix character from Commando, and it's kind of a cool idea, right, of having him fight the Predator and prevail. And now it's like we have Murtaugh, right, as that. And it makes sense with Joel Silver, right, being the producer of Lethal Weapon, that he would bring in Glover and have him kind of exist in that similar space. Only it's not just a Murtaugh, right? It's an angry Murtaugh, which makes sense too, right? Because if you think of Murtaugh in Lethal Weapon, right, where that LA that they existed in Lethal Weapon, where he was opposite Riggs, and Riggs was the crazy one, and he was kind of more the I'm getting too old for this shit guy. And it's funny, I just said I'm getting too old for this shit guy. I just realized I haven't really been swearing as much as I thought. I thought it was going to be like, oh, this fucking movie is just the best fucking thing ever. Let's just get in here and talk about it. And I didn't really end up doing it as much. So who knows? Maybe. I made myself a kind of a strong iced latte before this, and I thought maybe I'd be really hopped up on caffeine, but it didn't happen. So anyway, but he's got that kind of I'm getting too old for this shit sensibility to him, but also you could imagine if crime got so bad to the point that it was a war zone in LA, this is the Murtaugh you'd probably get. You'd probably get a not only I'm too old for this shit, but I'm tired of taking this shit Murtaugh, right? You could see a Murtaugh that if you give him 7 years of shit just getting worse and worse, like, in that opening scene where there's that pitched battle between the two cartels, and he just comes flying in his car and starts smashing through people, and then he's like, okay, well, how am I going to get these guys? And he just like, rips off the door, or has the door to his car like smashed off, and he's like, all the stuff that he's doing there, like that's a Murtaugh on the edge, right? Like right, like things have gotten so bad that he just can't take it anymore. And I mean, the whole first scene is very bonkers anywhere, where it's like, the cartel guys are like in this warehouse where they were packing up drugs, and they're like trying to get as much coke in their nose as they can while they're running around, and then of course the Predator comes and just wipes them all out anyway, and then like, Danny Glover's kind of like, well, what's happening here? How did this, this Predator thing here is not kind of, he doesn't, obviously he doesn't know what's going on, but it's kind of like a bit of a surprise to him. He's not willing to just accept that they had some good luck there. The other element of this, of course, too, right, is that there's a sense that we know of predators now. Like that I think it's one of the interesting things about that first movie is that with this movie coming after it, they really kind of worked on this idea of like, okay, well, what would happen if, Dutch, he survives, right? He probably would be talking to the government and telling them, he would be debriefed, right, as a soldier. They would talk to him about it. And the idea too that like that they everybody believed him, right? That everybody believed everything he said, and it all made sense. And there's like, okay, there's this predator thing out there, this alien that's attacking us. Like, okay, when is it going to come back? We need to get all the the technology. We need to learn about this thing, as opposed to being like, man, this guy's wacko. Let's like just we're going to give him an honorable discharge, a medical discharge, and we'll call it good. Just get him out of there. No, they believed it all and thought, okay, this is an opportunity for us to like enhance our weapons technology. And so when Busey's on the scene, right, we don't know fully what Busey's there for. We don't know that this is why he's there. We don't know that he's there because he knows everything about the Predator. But if you watch the first movie, you get a sense that that's why that's what's happening here, because of course we know the Predator's there, right? We're seeing the Predator, we're seeing him take people out. We know what's going on here, and I think that's a really good approach to it, right? They're not covering the same ground as before. The interesting thing, though, is we still have the situation where Danny Glover's trying to figure out what's going on, right? Like he doesn't know, even though we all know what it is. But Danny Glover's so good that it works, right? It works that that he's wanting to figure this stuff out. We get other actors in this. We get Maria Conchita Alonso, who, of course, her character, right, is similar. It's an interesting thing that they do with these movies, where they have this similar approach where. The female character is there to kind of explain to us what are some of the things the Predator, what are some of the rules the Predator has, right? What are some of their rules that they follow in their process in being hunters, right? So in the first movie, right, that character, we find out that if you're unarmed, right, the Predator won't kill you, which is not quite true, right? I mean, he will kill you if you're unarmed. So it was Anna was the character in the previous movie, played by Elpidia Carrillo. So in that sense, right, I mean, he will kill you if you've got a gun initially, and then he disarms you. He'll kill you after that. So, but if he feels like you're not a threat to him, right, then he won't kill you. And then with Maria Conchita Alonso, even though she's a hard ass cop, right, who's really taking care of business, really like the big thing, right, is that we find out that she's pregnant, and the Predator won't kill her because she's pregnant. So that's sort of a different piece there. The other thing that's interesting now. I think you can make the case when I was talking about like sort of the environment for the crime in this movie, in terms of setting the stage, right, for this idea that that people think crime is so bad in LA that when you get to 97 it's just going to be out of control, it's going to be a war zone. Because the movie seems so kind of over the top and bonkers, it's almost like a play on that concept, right? So it's almost like they're making fun of what people, so it's kind of like when you're on Twitter and you see like conservative people talking about cities and people making fun of them for thinking that's what cities are like when they haven't been to one in years. They don't know what a city's like in America. And to kind of further that point, there's a scene where Danny Glover goes to see, he goes to the funeral because his friend is murdered, is killed by his friend Danny, or his partner Danny is killed by the Predator. And so he goes to his gravesite to kind of just pay his respects and drop some flowers off. And there's a kid there with a fake like toy Uzi that's going around pretending to shoot people. And going back on that idea from the Predator won't kill somebody that's unarmed that they don't think is a threat, right? It's like the Predator can recognize that it's a toy gun and doesn't shoot the kid. But police officers in America, right, especially if it's a person of color, a kid, who's a person of color wielding a toy gun, cops are pretty willing to kill them. So I wonder if that was also on purpose, right? That the predator can figure it out, but police officers can't. But it was an interesting scene there again, kind of going back to that rule that the Predator won't kill somebody who's unarmed that doesn't see it as a threat, right? The Predator knows it's a fake gun, doesn't shoot the kid, but they kind of put it in there like, oh, what, do you think the Predator's going to kill this kid? And it doesn't, So anyway, so having that in there. A few other names that we'd recognize. We were talking about Die Hard, as potentially an action movie that you could potentially put above. Predator. Robert Davi is in this. He plays the police. He plays the captain, but I thought he was like an assistant or something like that. But anyway, it was weird. Like his name was like assistant or not assistant. But anyway, he's an interesting character. His character name is Heineman, which is great because it just like you hear like Danny Glover yelling it out all the time. Come on, Heineman, whatever. But his deal is that he wants to kind of get Danny Glover to stop being a cop on the edge. but he also likes and respects him, so he's always like giving him like this is your last chance, this is your last chance, kind of thing. But that's kind of Robert Davi's role. And then Kent McCord, if you ever watched the old show Adam 12, Kent McCord is in this as another as sort of the direct chief or the direct head of Danny Glover's character. So it was kind of cool to see him, an Adam 12 alum in there as Danny Glover's boss. I thought that was really great. And of course, Bill Paxton is in this. He plays kind of the young cop who's kind of the young upstart kind of crazy guy who eventually the Predator gets him as well, but he's kind of a fun character there. Like he hits on Maria Conchita Alonso and then she grabs him by the balls and really hurts him there. Then Adam Baldwin is a member of Gary Busey's team. It's funny. So he's not one of the Baldwin brothers, but he's just but he has the name Baldwin. So I guess with all the Baldwins there, he's. He kind of has, in a way, right, he's a Baldwin without being a Baldwin, which maybe works in his favor. But he's part of Gary Busey's team there. And then big name from the 90s, Morton Downey Jr., which Morton Downey Jr., for people who don't know, he was kind of the start of this big, I don't want to say shock jock if that's the term, but he was the start of the big political radio kind of over the top thing. He had his own show on syndicated TV here in the States. There's a really great one if you go on YouTube. I think you can find it where he had the guys from Trauma on. Like Lloyd Kaufman and them, and they just completely destroyed his sensibilities, right? He just didn't know what to make. You had a show called Toxic Avengers for whatever. He'd smoke his cigarettes and blow them everywhere. He was one of the big things for him was when they're starting to kind of come with laws against smoking in the United States to kind of curb people from smoking. He was very adamant of no, everybody should be allowed to smoke. I'm going to smoke all, and then I think that's what ended up killing him. I think was cigarette smoking. But yeah, I mean, the names you think of now, I was trying to think Alex Jones, all those kinds of people. He's kind of the first of that element, but he wasn't quite to the extent of he wasn't quite, I don't want to say he wasn't quite the he wasn't full on I don't know if he was say conspiracist kind of thing like that. So he definitely died of lung cancer. So and it was in 2001. So he was born in 1933. So he was still young enough when he passed. He used to smoke his cigars and stuff like that. He would go on his show, just yell and blow smoke in people's faces and stuff like that. My friends and I, we would watch it, because I was trying to think when his show was on. It would have been on around this time, right, 1990. We used to love watching him yell at people. We just thought it was we didn't even know what was going on, what they were saying. I remember because we watched things like Rush Limbaugh and stuff like that too, and it was just kind of like a novelty. It just didn't make any sense. And I remember my mom being just sort of just humoring it, just being okay, whatever, and which I think is kind of good in that sense because you'd think as a parent, you'd be no, you don't need to be supporting these guys. These guys are horrible, but they just kind of let me do it, and eventually I learned for myself that these guys were all kind of full of it, and it wasn't worth it. But Morton Downey Jr. plays that character in this. He's this sort of a reporter who's a muckraking reporter who's out there kind of causing trouble. That's his character. He doesn't get killed off by the Predator in this. I don't think. I don't remember, but yeah. So. And the Gary Busey character, it's just absolutely fantastic. As the government guy who is trying to capture the Predator, and it's just a really great scene when he reveals everything to Danny Glover, and he's yeah, he sees our heat, he can see our heat, and he's they're putting on the suits and all of that stuff to go in and try to fight the Predator. And the Predator, it turns out he's had some years to adapt, right? It's kind of in the 10 years since then, right? That since the last Predator got beaten by Schwarzenegger, that Predator must have told some of his predators in the meantime, right? The other predators that we need some way to see people beyond just being able to see their heat, and it turns out that they were able to kind of see the lights that they were using while they were in there, and that's how they get attacked. But because there's a scene, essentially what happens is that Danny Glover, after however many moments where things are kind of going bad, there's this really, really great subway scene with the Predator, which I thought was one of the best. I think, when you're putting the Predator in an urban environment, and one of the things I didn't know is that at the time, LA hadn't they hadn't rolled out their subway system yet. So I think it came out that same year, or the next year. I didn't realize that LA didn't have a subway at the time. But I think if you look in the credits, that they mentioned the BART system, which is the subway system in San Francisco, which I've ridden that one multiple times. I actually haven't ridden the subway in LA. I remember I was visiting a friend in LA who he was there for a convention, and he had a hotel room, and I guess the coworker that was supposed to go with him didn't show. So he's like, hey, if you want to come out to LA, free hotel room, you just gotta make your way out here on your own. And we ended up going to a baseball game and stuff like that. And when I got out of the airport, he was doing like conference sessions and things like that. So I needed to find my way to the airport, from the airport to the hotel. And I was like looking at the subway, and I was like, oh, maybe I'll do the subway. And then I saw a lot of reports saying, it's not safe, it's not great. So I got this thing called the Super Shuttle, this blue bus that drove me there. And as I was going by, I was looking at the subway stations that I would have possibly passed. And I saw there was a guy standing at the station who looked like an extra on like an old Dr. Dre video of like just the angry guys that were like, that are in gangs or whatever, or something like that. And it kind of scared me a little bit. I was like, oh boy, yeah, maybe I was glad I didn't take that. So I think I probably wouldn't have done anything. It wouldn't bother me at all. But hey, those Dr. Dre videos, they kind of left a mark on me there. But no, anyway, I was just saying that I've never ridden the subway. I've ridden the commuter rail. My friend and I, when we went and saw the baseball game in Anaheim, we took the commuter rail out there, which for anybody in the world who's been on commuter rails in different cities, this was rush hour that we took the train. And it was easy to find a seat. I don't know if there's another city that I've taken a commuter rail on during rush hour, especially pre-pandemic, and had an easy time finding a seat. But this was like, there was empty seats all over the place. So, I mean, it really is interesting how LA is not a commute. They don't use rail like that. They drive everywhere. People drive everywhere. Despite having a commuter rail system, people were just like, rather drive and sit in traffic than hop on the train there. I mean, if you were in New York and you were taking like the Long Island Railroad or the New Jersey Transit at that same time of day, you would have been sharing a seat with somebody, or my buddy and I, we got on like just before the train left, so it was like we were just getting on, so everybody else was on already. I mean, we would have had to split up and each take a different seat if this was on the East Coast. But yeah, it's completely. Very easy to get a train there. But anyway, I'm completely getting off track here. I wanted to talk about the really great, action sequence that happens on the train, because the Predator shows up on the subway, and so you've got Maria Conchita Alonso and Bill Paxton are riding the subway because they're supposed to. I don't know if they were supposed to take it to meet Danny Glover somewhere. I can't remember exactly why they were riding the train. But then, a crime incident happens on the subway there, where this gang of guys attack one guy, and he pulls a gun on them. Then everybody's got guns pointed at each other, and then Bill Paxton and Maria Conchita Alonso show up with their guns, and suddenly the Predator's like, "Hey, there's a party here where everybody's got guns. I'm going to come in and kill everybody." And so then it was like Maria Conchita Alonso trying to get everybody out of the train while Bill Paxton's sort of distracting the Predator and sort of helping, kind of do that. And then when the Predator gets to, after killing Bill Paxton, when it gets to Maria Conchita Alonso, that's when we find out that he can't kill her because she's pregnant. I remember watching that sequence in, probably like 91, 92. A friend of ours, it was kind of a sleepover, so it was a group of us watching it. And I remember this friend was adamant that we couldn't miss that scene because it was so vital to the Predator backstory. This is really great Predator information. It was like one of these things where it was like, everybody, you got to stop, everybody, be quiet, because we could see the scene where he doesn't kill her because she's pregnant. And it was like, okay, but we've all seen this movie before. We all know that. And I guess, one person that's here hasn't seen the movie. We can explain to him after if we want to. But yeah, it kind of reminded me of this guy I worked with one time in the kitchen who, like, I was talking with him, and all of a sudden, like, the opening to Crazy Train came on. He was like, "Oh, sorry, man, I gotta stop you here. I gotta listen to Crazy Train." It's like, oh, okay, yeah, I'll make sure. But anyway, it is a really great scene. I'm always a fan of a good subway action sequence. And, me, I'm a fan of trains and subways and stuff like that anyway. So, that kind of thing is really nice. But yeah, you kind of get after that scene where Danny Glover's just kind of had it with the Predator at this point, and then he gets captured by Gary Busey's men. They put him in this trailer, and they kind of give them the knowledge dump where they tell him everything that's going on about who this Predator is and all that stuff. And it's kind of interesting because when you're looking at the time stamp at that point, right, they're not going to succeed, right? That Gary Busey and those guys, they're not going to succeed. But it seems like it's such a foolproof idea, right? That you've got these suits on that they can't, the Predator can't see your heat. You've got these freezing guns that you can use to freeze the Predator. It should all work out perfectly. And what's great is that Danny Glover sees, because they're kind of, he's sitting in the van with Adam Baldwin watching as Gary Busey and everybody are going through there, and he's seeing that it's not working, and he's like trying to tell him, like, get out of there, get out of there. And that's why, Danny Glover, because he doesn't listen to anybody, he runs out of the room and gets a gun, and he goes in himself to try to fight the Predator. And of course, he does a better job of it. And then Gary Busey, he kind of comes back after getting shot or whatever. His face is kind of burnt, and he tries to capture the Predator again, and it's like the Predator's like, okay, I've got this blade thing here, this circular disc, CD blade thing. I'm just gonna throw this thing, and it's gonna go through some hanging meat here, and then it's just gonna decapitate you. And that's kind of just what we're gonna do here. But it was a good try. It was a good try on Busey's part. But yeah, the Predator just had enough. But what's great about that is it kind of leads into this really great finale with Danny Glover. What I loved about it, the final fight between Glover and the Predator, is that in the first movie, right, you're in the jungle, and Schwarzenegger as a soldier, as a soldier who's been a soldier for years and has been trained in the bush. He's fought in jungles before. He kind of sets up traps using his environment, right? He kind of knows how to do that kind of thing. He's done it before, and so he kind of spends his time while he's invisible, while he's covered in mud, which I read in the Wikipedia that I guess he had to be covered in mud for weeks. Like, they had to shoot those scenes for weeks. It was like 3 weeks of him covered in mud. He said it was horrible. They also said it was really cold shooting there because it was in Mexico, which, Mexico in the mountains, it looks, you think Mexico, you think like Cancun and stuff like that, but no, there's a lot of really cold areas there because of, the elevation and all of that. But anyway, he's using his environment, whereas like with Danny Glover's character, right, it's a little different because he's not using his environment to sort of set things up in advance, right? It's more like he's using the environment because he's so familiar with being in the city and being in that environment. He's using it to his advantage in a way that the Predator isn't familiar with, right? Where he can kind of get from space to space. But of course, the thing is, the Predator is always up high, right? He's always well above his enemies, because it's, think of it from a hunting standpoint, right? It makes sense. I mean, my dad hunted deer for, he still does hunt deer. You have like a big tree stand, right? Where you're way up in a tree and you can see the deer come by, and you just shoot them, from right there. It's an easy way to do it. And then also, like the Predator, right? When my dad gets a deer, he hangs it upside down, because he lets it bleed out, kind of thing. So it's a very, very similar thing to like what the Predator does. But Danny Glover kind of, he's at home in this space, and he has that advantage. But what I loved about it too is that because he's not like setting things up in advance the way that Schwarzenegger was, he's forced to be much more resourceful. But it's like kind of everything that's available to him, he's using it, and the best, of course, is when he sees the disc, that the kind of the blade that the Predator has, and he grabs it and he uses it against the Predator in order to beat him. It was just the whole thing was just. I think for me, when I saw the movie, I think what made me like it so much was that it was so different from the first movie. That you have this larger than life hero in Arnold Schwarzenegger defeating the Predator. And it kind of made sense, right? It's almost like it's almost like we our best against your best kind of mindset, right? And then Schwarzenegger can do it. Whereas Danny Glover, he's still he's not a small guy, right? And he's not like a weakling or anything like that. He's still a big guy. He even said, he was like in his early 40s when he made this, and he was like probably in the best shape of his life, he said. So he was like able to do a lot of the kind of the rolling, the jumping, that kind of the running and all of that stuff. But he's not like larger than life, right? But he's resourceful, right? He's able to use what's around him, and he's able to kind of get out of situations in ways that that not everybody is in this movie, right? That other people are getting killed by him. And then, of course, we get like the greatest ending in a Predator movie, I think. The ending of the first Predator movie is just so iconic, right? With get to the chopper, and then like he's the helicopter comes back after the explosion, and he's just sitting there with his hands on his hips, right? You get that image of as the smoke is clearing around him. It's just such a really great iconic image there. And it's one of those things, I think, with this mindset with Danny Glover, where it's like, okay, well, how do you have that same thing, or how do you have something that's at that level when you don't have Schwarzenegger to stand there with his hands on his hips, smoking a cigar with the smoke clearing around him? So they come up with this idea, right, that he's gonna, after he kills the Predator, all these other predators are going to show up. And I know I keep calling them all predators. I know that they have like a name for their alien race and all that kind of stuff, but it's kind of more fun to just call them predators. But all these predators show up around him, right? And there's almost this sense of like, oh, what's going to happen now? And I think the first time I saw it, I thought, oh man, what's going to happen? They're just going to kill him? Like, is he going to have to fight some more of these predators? And then you realize that that's not what's happening, right? Some of them take the body away of the one that he killed. The others start to kind of walk off, and then one of them throws him an old gun from 1715. And then, of course, in true Predator fashion, right, like just what you would expect from an alien race like the Predators, they don't let him know that they're taking off. It's just sort of like he realizes that doors are starting to shut and engines are starting to power up, and he has to run away. And of course, when he does, he's covered in soot after, which kind of a nod to with the Jamaican crime, the Jamaican cartel, right? There's kind of a mindset. There's kind of like the voodoo elements of it. And there's almost a sense of him like, performing a voodoo ritual where he's just covered in soot and ash. But he's just there, and Adam Baldwin shows up and kind of gives him a hard time, and he just pushes him and just like, get away from me. It's just such a fantastic ending for what is a fantastic movie. There's so few, when you think of a movie as good as The Predator, right, it is hard to imagine a sequel. Because one of the interesting things about Terminator versus Terminator 2 is that the first Terminator is not as good as the first Predator, right? They kind of take a really solid movie in The Predator, which the similar thing about The Predator and Terminator, right, is that Terminator also kind of has a horror movie, stalkerish vibe to it that's like sort of horror / action. Predator, they both have that similar vibe to them. But, they kind of take what's good about Terminator, and then they just turn it up to they just make it even better, right? It's one of those instances where the sequel is better than the first movie, at least for me. I feel like it is. Whereas in this case, the first Predator was so good, it would have been, I don't know, how they would have been able to match it, other ways. But the fact that they said, okay, one of the ways we can match it is we can set it in an urban environment. And then what we're going to do is we're going to take this urban environment, we're going to turn it up to 11, right? We're going to take kind of all the understandings that we have of urban environments here in 1990. We're going to roll it forward to 1997 and say this is what it would be if the Morton Downey Jr.'s or whoever else, if what they think the city is now, if that's what they think it is, this is what it would be, 7 years from now. So this is what we're going to make it. So they make it into this bonkers, like, ultra criminal, almost dystopian version of LA, and then we're gonna throw the Predator down in that, but also we're gonna have this cop in Danny Glover who just is kind of tired of being a cop in LA, but he feels like he's just got to keep being a cop in LA because that's what he was born to do, and he's just sort of trying to take the law into his own hands, and just try to make some kind of dent in what's happening in LA at that time. It's like, okay, that's the one that's going to be the apex, I don't know what a combatant, right, or adversary to the Predator. Yeah, it's such a really fantastic way to approach this. And again, I'll be looking at the other movies when we come in, later on. But I think part of the reason why I think Prey is the perfect third movie to these, one, it has a direct connection to this movie, right? Because the gun that he receives in this movie, we find out is, from that Prey movie, right? Because that Prey movie takes place in the early 18th century. So there's that element there too. But then also it's like, okay, what could you do after, this movie? Where would you want to place things in that movie? And it's like this idea of like, okay, maybe, colonial America, and have it be a First Nations tribe, right? Have it be, do that kind of thing. Do something completely. Have it be a young woman who's the one who has to outlast the Predator. It's kind of like the perfect next step from this movie. And of course, what happens is after this one, from my understanding at least, is that this movie doesn't do as well in the theater as they would have hoped. They said it did have a good opening weekend, but from there it kind of falls off. And I think part of the reason why it didn't do as well, right, is again, this is 1990, and I was talking about that sort of larger-than-life Arnold Schwarzenegger presence. You can't replace Arnold Schwarzenegger with Danny Glover and have it be a huge box office success. That's just the unfortunate reality at that time. And so I think that's probably why it didn't do as well. I think even for myself watching it the first time, I was like, this is good, but it's not Schwarzenegger. And then kind of over time, like I said, on repeated viewings, I was like, no, I actually like this one better, because I like the idea of Danny Glover as Murtaugh being like, I'm too old for this shit, and I'm going to kill the Predator. It just was, it kind of worked on me a different way. And then, of course, as I watched it more, Predator kind of, became bigger. I became a bigger fan of Predator instead. So yeah, it's but they're both like really great, and I really like them. But I think that's the big piece right there, right? Is that it didn't do as well, and so we go a good chunk of time without another Predator film, right? So I was trying to think. It was like so the next time they do an actual main Predator movie, Predators, is in 2010. So that's 20 years after this movie. Now, again, they do have the two Alien versus Predators in between, right? So, but even that one, we don't get Alien versus Predator until '04, right? And then '07, we get the sequel to that. So '04, '07. But even then, right, we don't have anything in there. We don't have anything in between that period. And I think part of that was because of what how this movie was received, right? That it just didn't have the kind of, it didn't do as well as they wanted it to. So there's that piece. But of course, in between that time, you're starting to build the Predator story, right? In between, from 1990 to 2004, when we get Alien vs. Predator, right? We get the Alien vs. Predator comic book series. We get Batman vs. Predator. So we get some projects there in between. There's novels that come out. There's video games, all kinds of stuff that happens, between that time to sort of build up the desire for more Predator. And I think that's when Alien vs. Predator becomes a thing, because it's like, that was one of those properties in between that time that people were really interested in. But yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of too bad this movie didn't do well. And there's some other things I was reading about it. Like, one is that it was originally NC-17 until they edited it more, which is really interesting, right? And again, I think it was NC-17 because there's nudity. Again, it would never be NC-17 based on the violence, right? That's not a reason that you would ever make a movie NC-17. But if there's women naked in it, then yeah, you gotta we don't want the kids seeing that. You see violence, you can see people getting disemboweled. That's okay. But yeah, the other thing's not that bad. So, but. It's kind of too bad, but on the other hand, thinking about it for myself as a kid at that time, yeah, 2010, I was 31 at that time. So really, for my formative time as a kid, right, growing up, these were the two Predator films that I had. This was what I understood as a Predator. There was all this other media out there, but from a film standpoint, it was just these two. So this was kind of what I could kind of go back and forth on and do, do some of those kinds of things. Double features in that kind of thing. Now one of the quick things I do want to mention is, because I was saying how, I wasn't sure what was going to happen with Predator, in terms of in the future because of what's going on with Disney. I completely missed when I was looking up on Wikipedia about these movies, that there's a movie called Badlands it's slated to come out in 2025. It's directed by the same director who did Prey, Dan Trachtenberg. And I don't know if it's supposed to be a sequel to Prey. I think that might be. I think it's the working. So it's a sequel to Prey. So they're going to do another Prey movie, which I think could be really interesting. So they are doing. They are looking to they're developing something else. So it looks like this was February 2024. So it's possible. I don't know when this was edited. I don't know when they edited this Wikipedia page. I wonder if it's possible that maybe this happened while I was between when I was preparing for this episode and then they updated the page, and that's why I missed it there. But yeah, that's some good news that we might be getting another movie here. Probably, I imagine it'll probably be direct to Hulu like this one. But yeah, so we'll kind of see what happens there. But yeah, I think at this point, I think we could wrap this up. I think, again, what I would say about Predator 2, I think where I would go here is sort of a final thought here, is that as this movie with this bonkers version of the future, near future, right? It's 7 years from where it was in 1990, but this sort of near future dystopia. with Gary Busey, which, as I said, I think he's pretty fairly abusive. I think I was talking with Ty about this one. He said 7 to 8 on the abusive scale. I think that's probably about accurate with the amount of Busey we get. But then also, the fact that we've got Murtaugh from Lethal Weapon fighting and defeating the Predator, and with all the great action sequences we have, all the great supporting cast here. I mean, yeah, I think, again, I think Predator, in terms of which I like better, I like them both pretty close to the same. I think in terms of, I was ranking action movies, I do think the first Predator is a better action movie and it would be higher on the list. But this movie, this one is not going to get a lot of love, right? It's not going to be on any of those top 10 lists. There's probably, if a lot of kids out there don't know that meme with the two people, with Weathers and Schwarzenegger, shaking hands, if people don't know that comes from the first Predator, they definitely haven't seen the second Predator, right? They don't know that even exists. And I think that's kind of a shame because this is a movie that's just a fantastic one for kids to see. I think for people that are younger, especially people who were born in the 90s, you probably wouldn't even know sort of this understanding of this war on drugs kind of thing and this mindset. And I think also too, it would be good too because you kind of can see that we're getting a similar kind of narrative around cities and urban environments now that we had back then. So, it's kind of a really fun, bonkers movie there in that sense. And I really think people that haven't seen it, the younger people that are listening here, you should definitely check this one out. What's great is that they're both on Hulu, so you can stream them both back to back and do a nice double feature there. I think what's going to happen here when we get out of after Predator, the quality of these things are going to drop after Predator 2 here. I think Prey is the only one that I can think of. Again, I'll be rewatching them. Actually, the Shane Black Predator, the one that came out in 2018, I haven't even seen that one yet. So that'll be new for this one here, doing this one. I have seen Predators, the one that has Adrian Brody, which is it's going to be an interesting one. We talk about that one. And I've seen the Alien versus Predator film, so I've seen those. The quality from Predator 2 to these other ones until we get to Prey, it definitely drops off quite a bit. And I think it's unfortunate that Predator 2 doesn't always get the love that it should, because I think it holds up. It is up there, I think, is as good as that first Predator film, and definitely people should check it out. All right, so why don't we wrap things up here? So plugs, as always, my novels, Don's House in the Mountains. You can get that one on Amazon and in paperback and also Kindle. Link to that is in the podcast description. Of course, Bainbridge. I'll be doing. You can check that one out as well. I mean, Bainbridge versus Predator. That would be a really great idea for a book, right? I don't know if Disney would let me have the rights to it to use it in there. I guess I could use a character like the Predator, right? And everybody would know it's the Predator, but it's not the Predator, right? I could come up with something like that maybe, and because that would be kind of a fun idea, right? To have my character fighting the Predator. But and I have used the Predator in a few different things. It's funny. My friend Ian and I, based off this second movie, based off the second Predator, we came up with this idea of Magnum versus the Predator, as in like Thomas Magnum, only it was Tiberius Magnum. So this idea that Magnums exist throughout time as like guys that hang out with rich guys and live in their guest houses and stuff like that. And the idea is that at the turn of the century, Teddy Roosevelt encounters a predator while he's hunting. And it's in the historical records, right? It's in the presidential archives. So Gary Busey from this movie, he's like a cybernetically enhanced Gary Busey that goes back in time to try to fight that predator and capture that predator and bring it back to the present. And then Tiberius Magnum, essentially Tom Selleck from Magnum, but it's just, the older version of him. He's the one who successfully beats the predator and defeats it. So that was an idea that we had for a movie, Magnum versus the Predator, that never got outside of the stage of us just describing the concept that we'd want to do for it. But also my free write short or flash fiction, I have this character Mads, who's like this Norwegian ornithologist who always gets into all kinds of different things, and he and another character are in South American jungle, thinking that they're on an ornithology trip, but actually they get confused with a marine group that's going to confront some predators, and so then he ends up having to defeat the predators. So the Predator is just always a fun character that I like using and stuff. I think also describe what Batman versus the Predator movie would have been like, that they another character in my flash fiction rents what is Batman versus the Predator, but it's actually based off the old TV show. So it's like the Predator is just kind of hanging out with like a suit on with like hot, like a gorgeous woman in go-go boots, and then like the guys that are like the thugs, and the woman calls him some Preddy baby and stuff like that. And like instead of like slashing everybody, he just goes into a room and just green smoke knocks everybody out, and he like steals a portrait or something like that. So yeah, I mean, I love the idea of Batman versus the Predator being the old Batman, but anyway, yeah, I'm getting way off track here. We're trying to wrap this thing up. So yeah, definitely thank you everybody for listening, and yeah, we'll be back soon, and in 2 weeks we'll be looking at the 2 Alien versus Predator films. So stay tuned for that. But yeah, thank you everybody for listening, and we'll talk soon. Bye everyone.